Ancient Greece was a busy and hectic place, and unlike today, Greece was not a country, but a collection of hundreds of independent city-states, or polis. These city-states functioned independently, having their own governments, armies, deities, and even to some extent different variants in language. Of these hundreds of city-states, we see many differences, from the oligarchy and diarchy of Sparta to the direct democracy of Athens. These city-states were unique and different, but which was better? Is there one that's better? What's the ideal city-state? Hi, my name's Adam, I'm an ancient Greek reenactor and history enthusiast, and I invite you to join me today as we discuss what Plato's masterpiece, The Republic, says about the ideal city-state. Plato's most famous work, The Republic, perhaps his greatest work, is commonly regarded as the foundation of political philosophy. It incorporates political philosophy, moral psychology, metaphysics, and aesthetics, and covers almost all areas of philosophy. Although massive and complex, the main idea of the Republic revolves around the idea of what the ideal city-state looks like, and its conclusion may surprise you. Plato draws many lines between the city and the human, combining the soul of the city with the soul of its people. Throughout the 10 books of the Republic, Plato writes many dialogues playing with what social and political justice is, and its role in the organization of this ideal city-state, or polis. And a recurring theme within these texts is the idea of the importance of strength and compulsion in human affairs and justice. There is a dialogue which sees Socrates, Thrasymachus, a sophist who clashes with Socrates, Glaucon, Socrates' friend, and Adeimantus, who will be a common character in the remaining books of the Republic, discuss the nature of justice. Thrasymachus and his crew threaten Socrates in an attempt to bring him over to speak, stating that he can come over by his own accord, but also mentioning that they outnumber Socrates and his friends and could force him. Socrates decides to go without violence and discuss. Thrasymachus holds the view that justice is whatever benefits the strong, which is opposite the common view of justice. Justice typically benefits the weak, for it keeps the strong accountable and grants the weak a share in decision-making. Socrates counters him by stating that political justice must benefit the ruled, not the rulers. Book 2 of the Republic sees Glaucon and Adeimantus discussing whether they agree with Socrates' rebuttal. Glaucon says that justice is an agreement between people to not harm each other, because a situation where everyone is trying to harm everyone for their own personal gain would result in most people getting a negative outcome most of the time. However, he states that if given a ring that can make you invisible and get away with anything that you can, people would do bad things if they didn't reap the consequences of their actions. This shows that people might value injustice more than justice deep down. Socrates would come to introduce the idea between the soul and the city, and that we can learn about an individual's idea of justice by looking at the city's idea of justice. Now, if you wanted to build an ideal city, how would you go about it? There's probably a multitude of ways, but perhaps one way is looking at cities which are already deemed successful and building from there, or looking at cities which are a little bit less fortunate. Plato and Socrates, do not go about it in this way at all. Plato has Socrates start completely from scratch. His first attempt was modest, a small combination of farmers, craftsmen, and traders eating a vegetarian diet, and they were not one for grandness. But Socrates says that if this city wanted to afford luxuries, it would have to expand and develop a military. This is the origin of Plato's class system, for it creates two distinct social classes, warriors and workers. Throughout the other books, we get more details regarding this setup, with the warriors becoming an educated, patriotic force, and the class getting split into two sections, the ruling elite and their worthy brothers-in-arms. So Socrates' city ends up with 3 classes, not 2, which are actually quite similar to that of Sparta. Not exactly the same, but quite similar. Socrates then goes on about how important it is for each citizen to be sorted into their own class, and creates a form of relationship lottery. He essentially creates a rigged lottery system which matches people of the same class together to mate. The upper class has no property of their own but shares everything between themselves, including their children, which are introduced into the larger community and raised by the community. The ruling class are also a mixture of both men and women. Socrates then creates a little sneaky lie that he would tell the population. The rulers have gold flowing through their veins, the warriors silver, and the workers iron, emphasizing how important it is that these classes stay with each other and not interbreed. Now, where does this talk of justice come in? Well, justice comes in by each class doing their part, the rulers ruling, the warriors warring, and the workers working. But what about the soul's attachment to the city? Socrates argues that, like his ideal city, the soul has three main parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Reason is the highest, directed at truth, spirit is directed at honour, and appetite is the drive we have with things such as food and drink. Therefore, justice in the city is more or less like justice in the soul. Each part has to do as they should. Interestingly enough, Socrates does not choose democracy as its form of rule, and Socrates tells us that the next step from democracy is tyranny, and ranks democracy as the second worst form of government. So Plato's work tells us that, according to Socrates, Athens was far from an ideal city. And strangely enough, Sparta actually fits into his ideal outline more so than Athens, but either way, his outline does not align with either polis completely. Throughout his description, he makes some very weird and unique decisions as to what the ideal city would be, that especially as modern people looking back would likely disagree with. The ruling elite are kind of communist, not owning anything and sharing even their children within the larger community. And he builds his idealized city on a class system, which isn't too dissimilar from most city-states at the time, in fairness. This social structure is not actually too dissimilar from Sparta's, seeing the moioi equals as the ruling elite and warrior class, the perioikoi as merchants and craftsmen who also served in the army, and the helots as a working servant class. Simply put, this Callipolis, translated as beautiful city, was made up of three social classes, two which protected the city both physically and constitutionally, and the other providing the city with what it needs. This description of what the ideal city is perhaps very different to what we would consider the ideal city to be. Straying away from democracy and individual liberties, Socrates builds an interesting picture of what the society would look like if it came to be. What do you think? Is this what a just ideal city would look like at the time? Or is Socrates actually building more of a flawed, unjust city? Let me know what you think down below. Looking at what Plato and Socrates build as the ideal city, it's interesting to see that essentially no power at Greece at the time fits into that ideal city, although personally I'd make the argument that it fits Spartan society more so than Athens, but it's still incredibly different. It's also interesting that these two men lived in Athens, yet they evidently deemed that Athens was not particularly ideal, as their foundation does not match Athens really at all. And looking at this city, it would also seem that eventually it would become flawed, as it's inevitable that the class systems would mix or some form of error would happen that would break the idealized state. And I believe Socrates even mentions this in the Republic as well. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you learnt something about the Republic's view of what the ideal ancient Greek polis would be. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing, and if you'd like to go the extra mile, check out the channel memberships, and a special thank you to our members. They really do mean a lot and help out the channel. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.